You are listening to the podcast of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium, the largest talent management institute in Hungary. If you want to know more about our mission, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or check out our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter channels. For interesting articles and analysis of our professors, external contributors, and students, look up our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.
All right, well, this is a special treat today, ladies and gentlemen. I have three professors from my alma mater, Biola University. One of these guests, Dr. Scott Waller, was my professor for, I think, 4 classes, maybe 5. We also have Darren Guerra and Tim Milosch on with us, Doctors Darren and Dr. Tim Milosch. So it's great to have you all here. These are all political science communications experts. They teach, they practice, and they just published an article in Christianity Today that really spoke to the focus that I have as a senior fellow with the Hungry Foundation, and that is sort of the integration of faith and politics, the public participation and social dynamics, and using free speech, using the liberties that we have. So when I was talking to Dr. Waller about this article and I was reading it over, I was like, well, we got to have you guys on to talk about it. So in summary, this article is basically about how Christianity should be involved in politics. And I'm gonna start with the conclusion. The final line in their article was really good. It says, "Now and in the future, Christianity doesn't need democracy, but a good and just democracy most certainly needs Christianity." For those of you who are just the kind to sign on for a few minutes and then sign off, just know this is what's happening in the rest of the dialogue. That quote right there is summarizing the rest of the dialogue, so I hope you all stay on. Dr. Waller, I'll start with you. What was the purpose of writing this article? I know all three of you were co-authors here, but what was the purpose and what was your hope for this article?
Well, I think at least twofold. One was to kind of clear the air on something. One is that any invocation of religion in the public square, or more specifically, any kind of invocation of thought that would admixture religion and democracy or politics, is quickly dismissed by many as, oh, these are a bunch of Christian nationalists. Christian nationalism has come to be used as a kind of bludgeon for anyone who would challenge the secular order. And we wanted to collectively, and as we somewhat we certainly represent our department's voice on this particular question. We wanted to fire a shot across the bow at that kind of canard. Secondly, we wanted to give credence to a voice that is increasingly prevalent, but somewhat silent, at least in a public sense, from the pews of America. I think that there are many people who fill the pews of American churches on a weekly basis who have an intuition that something is awry in American democracy, that we've departed in ways that, though they may not be able to articulate it in the terms that we do, they have the same intuition. And we were trying to give voice and a kind of confidence to people who might have those intuitions, and we think there are many, that their intuitions are well-founded.
So branching off of that point a little bit, a quote that I pulled from your article that speaks to the church as an encouragement for the church. It says, for American evangelicals who feel the risk to democracy that our post-Christian culture entails, this role of the church, of the local church, is good news. If you intuit rightly that the soul of America is not well because its moral foundation is dangerously eroded and that it poses a significant threat to American democracy, the local church is where the work of rebuilding that foundation starts. Man, when I read that paragraph, I was just like, I was shouting amen, and there was no one around me, so it was kind of weird, but I can't stress. I mean, the local church is where it starts. That's where discipleship starts. That's where family development, spiritual development starts. I really, really appreciate that one. Dr. Guerra, I'll go to you next. Do you see churches in America, let me just ask you, what is your take on the pulse of churches in America in encouraging their people to be politically active? And I don't necessarily mean politically active in in a sense of running for office, although that's great too. But just participating in votes or encouraging others or being involved in political conversations. How do you think the church is doing in America?
Well, maybe I can start with how historically they should do and move to how they are doing. But historically, the founders, it was a well understood maxim that to have a republic where the people play a prominent role, you need a virtuous people. And in America, to have a virtuous people, you need a religious people. That religion teaches people in the habits and the ideas that allow them to exhibit virtue that then spills over into the political realm. And so the church in America has always played a vital role in shaping the habits and the thoughts and, as Tocqueville would put it, the mores of the people. And so the church has always played a vital role. I believe today it still plays that role, but maybe less self-consciously. That my sense is that the link between the local church and a healthy society and politics is less self-aware. That people realize they need to live virtuous lives, they need to be Christ-like, but I think they're less able to articulate how that feeds into a healthy political order. And that's why it's more an intuitive sense of things. And because it's less explicit, then I think you have pastors and lay leaders who are wary about saying things that would encourage the people in the pews to be more politically engaged. And so I think that linkage or that self-awareness of their role could be helpful and needs to be more prominent.
Love it. And to go off of what you said about pastors and being afraid to say things that are political. Well, what is political anymore? I mean, morality, even for those who don't think morality should be involved in legislation, which we all agree that's kind of impossible for it not to be. But, for those, there are people who say, this is political, this is not political, abortion, immigration. A lot of times people who say that we should keep morality out of the church, keep morality out of politics, they'll be the first one to say that it's immoral to build a wall, or it's immoral to take rights away from women. Of course, this is in the context of abortion, things like that. So we can't get around it. We literally cannot. No one can get around the idea that morality is going to be integrated in law. So
agreed.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, an ancient definition of politics is how we ought to order our lives together, right? And so that's pretty comprehensive, right? We ought to do things. There's a right way and a wrong way, and we order our lives together, and that's politics. And so, yeah, we abuse the word politics and and use it when it's helpful and not when it's not. But we don't have good grounding of what it actually is. And when you're talking about deeply moral issues that will shape society, those are political, whether one wants to admit it or not.
Dr. Milosch. Now, Dr. Milosch and I, we have something in common. We're both alumni of Biola University. That's kind of fun. So, Dr. Milosch, my question for you, what do you see as, if the church could do one thing different in changing the morality or in giving America a better moral compass, what is one or two of the best things the church can do?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we can look to Scripture. I mean, Paul's injunction to Timothy to pray for those of authority, I think, is a first place to start. I mean, Americans in general are very practical people. We like rubber meets the road solutions, and I think for us a more spiritually inclined practice like prayer, there's a tendency to think like, okay, yes, of course we'll pray, but then what do we actually do? And it's like, stop there, actually pray. And I think one of the things that we don't see happen in a lot of churches is this kind of this really strong dedication to praying for the polity. Whether that's praying for the president, praying for your members of Congress, praying about particular issues. This is a routine prayer in my classrooms when I open up my classes at Biola with prayer. I try to practice this myself, is actually not just praying for our leaders, but praying for their wisdom on particular issues, praying that evil would be restrained in particular areas, that kind of thing. I really think there needs to be more of a discipline of praying for the polity in churches, from the pulpit, from the pews. I think that's a big thing. There's every once in a while there is that, but it's very rare. It's few and far between. It's not part of the discipline of prayer within churches for the most part, and I think that needs to change. The second thing I would probably encourage churches to do, and pastors, is to actually engage the conversation of politics. I think a lot of people in the pews who, as our article points out, are intuiting that there are problems with American democracy. They have a lot of questions about this. And I would say their local church is a great place to actually have some of those conversations, to actually start thinking about, how do we think about these things? How do we understand these things? How can we start approaching being part of solutions to some of these political problems we experience in our local communities? That's a great place to start, is just with conversations at your church. Unfortunately, because of things like polarization, people don't want to polarize their churches. They don't want to be the sower of division in their church or be blamed for that. And so I think there's a degree to which some churches, and maybe this might just be a place where pastors struggle with this, I'm kind of speculating here, but I think the conversation gets chilled a little bit at churches when they're not seeing pastors and other leaders of the church kind of model what that engagement in that conversation ought to look like. And so that's where you can have there's a host of organizations across America in the last few years that have been growing, trying to help people learn how to have conversations that depolarize and stuff like that. And I've been asking myself, what could that look like in a church? How can churches lead that conversation? Because we have our shared identity in Christ that allows us, or at least should theoretically allow us as Christians, to move beyond the trivialities of partisan politics in our discussions with one another.
Yeah.
John, if
really,
I could
really appreciate
follow up on that.
Oh, yeah, please.
I think that's a really good point. I think in terms of what I would encourage pastors, and I have deep respect for the men who lead congregations. It's a multifaceted kind of ministry that many of us who serve in ministry functions in more specific ways really are humbled by the multifaceted nature of what a pastor needs to do within a church setting. So with that said, we have to humbly offer advice in that regard. But one of the things that I have invited people in Christian leadership in general to see is consider giving Christianity a promotion. In the sense that from a pastoral perspective in a pulpit, I think we need to increasingly present Christianity as truth, that it's not therapeutic alone, that it's not just appealing to our emotions, but that the Christian worldview really, as my old professor J.P. Moreland used to say, carves the world up by the joints. In other words, it describes reality as we really encounter it. And oftentimes we present a version of Christianity that is somewhat demoted from that kind of perspective. And so that's why I say I think we need to give Christianity a promotion and present Christianity as providing real answers to real issues that real people do face. And I think in the world of politics, there are things that obviously affect real people. Dallas Willard, now deceased famous Christian philosopher out here on the West Coast, talked about one of the implications of knowing Christ is that, in a humble sense, we know things that other people don't know. Not to make us prideful or arrogant, but in a neighborly sense, we ought to be the kind of people who are in touch with things that we believe, as God has created this world, would foster human flourishing. we need to be the kind of people who share that. That is the kind of thing that all of us in our classrooms, as we train and disciple our students, say that they may be some of the most important people to enter the public sphere because they are acquainted, as they know Christ, with things that others don't. And it's out of that mindset that I think the church in the 19th century played a much more public and important role in American public life. Abraham Lincoln, I'm reading a long biography of autobiography of Abraham Lincoln. And in the Kansas-Nebraska controversy of the 1850s, the leading opponent of the Kansas-Nebraska Act was a consortium of pastors around the country. And that's the kind of thing I think we fail to see today.
And these are all really, really great answers. This is why I bring the smart people on, because then I just have to kind of coach the conversation and they make it great. It's funny you mentioned, Dr. Milosch, you mentioned a very practical, a rather simple, but very, very, very practical, effective exercise, discipline, as you called it, of praying for the polity, of praying specifically for it, not just talking about it, pray for you, pray for them. No, but actually taking what scripture says about praying for these people, praying for these issues. I remember the first time I ever saw that happen. It was in Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill Baptist Church, where Dr. Waller's daughter goes to church, attends church. And I mean, from the stage, they will pray for politicians, world leaders, not even just in America, mostly in America, but even outside America. They will pray for them by name. They will pray for issues by topic. Like they will actually drop names, so it's very specific, and I admire that so much. And it's a very, very good example that the pastor, senior pastor, and associate pastor set there at the church. Another practical way that pastors can be effective. I know I'm a DC guy. I've been there for the last 6-7 years, but pastors all across America, they need to have a political informant. And that probably sounds a little more, that kind of sounds shady, but they need to be aware. So I think if every pastor found someone in their church, even if, hopefully they could be in their church, but maybe if there's no one there somewhere else, where they can be kept up to speed on what the major political issues are going on, just so they can know how to have those conversations. Because it's easy to have conversations about some of the more popular issues like, abortion or sexuality, but to know the contemporary, to know what is actually happening, what laws are being passed, how to pray. The more they know, the better they can pray, the better they can encourage their congregations to pray.
And John, what I would actually add to that, and I like the point that you're raising about having a member of their church who can keep them updated on this stuff, and especially someone who is, you might say, plugged in to politics or government at some point, because a lot of churches do, and those people are not often known. You have, members of your city council who are sitting in your pews. You have members of the school board. And I think when we talk about churches and politics, we're often thinking about national politics, and what gets missed is local politics. And I think pastors shy away from national politics, and they end up throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It might actually be most effective for them to engage those people who can give them insight into, what's happening in the immediate locality that their church is planted in. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to be salt and light to your community, you really do need to know what's going on in that community, and you need to be encouraging those who are engaged in that space. And so I think when we talk about that, and I'll tag this on too, is that I think when people talk about being informed, they often think in terms of media consumption. So I like the fact that you're highlighting the point of a pastor having a relationship with a person who they know and trust, rather than being informed through just consuming preferred media outlets, because that can be its own problem in terms of siloing or insulating or polarizing people from one another in terms of being able to engage with the political topics.
No, I totally get that. Someone who is going to be fair in their analysis to the pastor, someone who's not going to be an echo chamber, but genuinely being of service to the pastor. I have to highlight something you just said that's so well. the importance of local politics. Man, if people, if we look at two of the biggest Supreme Court cases we've had in the last, what year is it now? 2024. So in the last 2 years, I can't keep track. Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, the case that overturned Roe versus Wade, and 303 Creative versus Ellenus, a landmark free speech case defended by Alliance Defending Freedom. And where did these cases begin? State laws, right? And people don't understand that, because it's not national news, it's not fun, yada yada. But it's like, guys, the stuff that becomes national news becomes national because it wasn't properly entertained when it was at the state level. Even school boards. You guys remember during 2020, in Virginia, in particular, other places too, but a lot of places in Virginia, these ridiculous policies were being passed in the public school systems, and they weren't being passed by a governor. They weren't being passed by, state politics. They were being passed by the school boards, And so
and it rippled out from there.
Yeah,
I did.
Just to second that, I mean, I don't, and forgive me, I don't know the name of it. There's a case I just read about yesterday where there's a local LA lifeguard who is being asked or ordered by the county to fly a flag he does not want to fly, the pride flag, and that will likely blossom into at least a state level case and a national case, respecting the right of conscience and compelled speech, so it is really like local citizens in America have the framework for which they can take a stand legally and resist compulsions that are not constitutional and not ethical. And so we'll see how a number of these play out. But people like to lament the state of our affairs, but we still have a system where a single local citizen taking the stand for the right and for the good has the legal wherewithal to resist the compulsion of a very powerful state.
Yeah. No, I like that. I appreciate that. It sounded like someone said I rippled out. I'm just going to repeat one quick little thing I said before and then move on. Just the importance of being involved in local state politics. Sometimes it's at the state level, like we saw with the case that ultimately overturned Roe versus Wade. And that right there in and of itself is a good reason to be involved in the sub-national politics, the local and state, because now that abortion is back in the hands of the state, like it was, prior to Roe in 73, now it's even more important to be voting for your state state laws. I really hope people understand that it only becomes national because it wasn't entertained better when it was at the state level. And of course, if the other side tries to challenge it, that's one thing. But there needs to be better participation in local politics. I'm really glad you guys brought up that point. Anyone have any comments on what we said so far before I move on to another question? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about history. We mentioned Christian nationalism, and I appreciate that in your article you called it ill-defined because I happen to be in touch with a lot of the nationally recognized so-called Christian nationalists. And I say so-called not to undermine them, but to say like they don't even know what it means because they don't even agree on a definition. There's been so many different applications of it, definitions of it. Some are saying that it's not as bad as what the left is saying, which I agree because I think the left is saying that it's something that it's not. But even the guys who do identify, there's just such a confusion. And I'll show my colors here. I don't think that using the phrase Christian nationalism is a very good thing at this point because it just causes confusion. To me, even if I were to agree with Christian nationalism, I don't know. I just don't think it's that effective. And I think there are plenty of Christian nationalists who are very, very well intended and who are doing great work. So I don't want to come across as a bad guy here. But we talk about that, and a lot of guys who do, a lot of signatories of Christian nationalism will go back to our history, to America's history, whether America was founded as a Christian nation, from the extreme side, more of a theocratic, and then they would look at some of the the colonies back then when they had blasphemy laws and things like that, which sort of indicate that it was more theocratic. Some will say that it was founded more on biblical principles, but not necessarily intended to be, you know, uh, a state church merger. Oh, and then of course the question comes up: the whole separation of church and state, nowhere found in the Constitution, but found in Jefferson letters and all that. So, Dr. Waller, I guess we'll start with you. Then I'm just going to go in that order. What are your thoughts on whether Christian or let me word it this way to be fair. How does the founding of America, whether built as a Christian nation or just on Christian principles, how does that the history support how we should be acting today as Christians in America?
Well, as I tried to say early in our time, Christian nationalism is kind of used as a kind of scarlet letter to be posted upon people as a kind of anchor to drag them down and marginalize their viewpoints. Anyone who invokes the idea that there is a special relationship with revealed religion within the United States is to be labeled a Christian nationalist and immediately dismissed. I think when you look back at the history, even as far back as the colonial establishments, and you inspect what was going on back in those 150 years prior to the American Constitution being formed, you don't see theocratic orders. You do see an institutional separation between the state and the institution of the church. You don't see theocracies, but when you investigate the early colonial charters and the early state constitutions, you see a lot of religious stuff. Does that mean that they were seeking to form theocratic orders? No. The answer seems to be, upon inspection, that what you see in American history, certainly in the colonial era and into the early American period, the 19th century particularly, you see that people thought that there was a particularly important public role for religion in the public square. And that's a very different thing than the separation of church and state. The separation of church and state entails, there's a lot of controversy about that, but a kind of institutional separation between the church and the state. What the separation of church and state has become in modern constitutional parlance for many is the removal of any public sense of religion in the public square, and that's a very different thing. There's a very different thing between institutional separation between the church and the state and religion in the public square. And our piece tries to draw back to an attention that the health of a democracy entails an important public role for religion.
Really, really good point there. So no separation as far as a clean-cut separation with no involvement, but definitely an influence. And we've got about 10 minutes or 9 minutes left here. So a lot of people will say, like we talked about earlier, they'll say that there should be no connection whatsoever because that's, imposing your morals on other people, whatnot. But on the one hand, I don't want to do that. I don't want to impose so much that I'm taking away the rights of others. None of us want that. But at the same time, God has, revealed his truth to us. And there is I had a conversation with my friend David Clausen, director of Biblical Worldview at Family Research Council, a couple weeks ago about this. And, there is a tension. Anyone who thinks critically about this enough will recognize the tension between imposing what the creator of the universe has revealed to us as truth and putting that in there because it's just true, but also not at the expense of others' rights. So I will pass that hot potato up to Dr. Guerra. What do you think? At what point is implementing Christian values a violation, if you will, of other people's rights, particularly those who are not Christians?
Yes. Well, I mean, this is where we need to separate some things out. There are two levels, and Dr. Waller alluded to this, that there is an institutional question, and then there is, and forgive me for throwing around the philosophical world, there's a metaphysical question. What is the very nature of reality? And I think that's what we're rubbing up against in our modern society, or postmodern society to be more accurate, is there's been a fiction for the last, I don't know, you can, wherever you want to start the clock, 100 years, 50 years, whatever, that we can have a metaphysically neutral existence. That reality doesn't really care what's right or wrong. Reality doesn't really, everybody can just make it up as they go along. Well, that doesn't accurately describe reality. The fact is, there is a reality and there is a moral order baked into the universe. That is just a fact. Like, you can't run from that. Like, you can pretend there's not a law of gravity, but there is a law of gravity. And you can pretend that there is no moral order, but there is a moral order. And so that's the thing. The American regime, the American project has always held that there is a moral ground for reality. And that's what most people mean when they say, hey, religion should play a role, because religion helps us sort out these moral grounds, these moral issues. And modern kind of liberalism has said, no, we're going to pretend to be neutral on everything, all the way down, neutrality. We can't make up our mind about anything. And to the extent that you make a stand morally or legally on anything, then that's a bridge too far. And that's the problem. And so then that forces people either to be a total moral relativist or to opt for some very heavy-handed theocracy. And the American system has always opted for a very reasonable and I think realistic ground, and that you can trace this back to the Virginia Declaration of Rights. You guys have probably heard this. Religion, or the duty to which we owe our Creator, and the manner of discharging it can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. Therefore, all men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience, and it is the mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, charity towards each other. That is the essential foundation, that it is our Christian duty to allow people their dictates of conscience. And so that creates a society where atheists, agnostics, people of different religious faiths, different strains of Christianity, non-Christians, Jews, or strains of Christianity like Catholics, they have freedom of conscience, because that is the proper, metaphysically real way the universe is wired. And so America has always been founded on this religious freedom, and it's not a special pleading for Christians. It's just a description of the nature of reality. And we've kind of moved away from that and pretended reality is something that it isn't.
Well, how far we've come.
Yeah.
Dr. Milosch, you're a communications guy. I know you're very politically involved too, but do you teach communications at Biola? That's your field, right?
My field's political science. I have taught communication courses, and I at one time coached the debate team at Biola. But my emphasis is actually more in international relations and foreign policy.
Okay, very cool. So let me ask you this: when it comes to youth, and by youth I mean that from our perspective, so like young adults engaging in these conversations and engaging in challenging conversations that involve issues that unfortunately are labeled divisive, even though we know topics are they're topics. They're not people. Topics cannot divide. Only people can divide when we are unwilling to communicate effectively. So, what advice would you have for young Christians today who want to engage in these conversations, to do it in a way that's impactful, effective, but without causing a divisive posture?
Get the tools to have the conversation would be my advice. And I say this because I think there's a general assumption that that as human beings, because we are hardwired for interaction and hardwired for for being sociable, we can just have conversations. But conversation is a skill. Speech is a skill. And there's been a general dumbing down of that ability, and we can blame a host of things. We can blame the pandemic and the physical separation it caused. We can blame social media and how it puts the screen between people. We can blame a lack of public speaking education in public schools. We can blame a lot of things for this, but the fact remains that most young people coming onto a college campus or coming into our classrooms are increasingly struggling to have conversation, and that makes difficult conversations that much harder. And so what we've been doing, so my advice is to young people, actually give attention to developing the skills to have a conversation with people, particularly people you disagree with. We've actually tried to put some pretty practical pieces in place for that here at Biola, which I'm really excited about. I work with students as a faculty advisor for a club on campus called Bridging Biola, and we work with a national organization called Braver Angels and Bridge USA to actually do exactly that. We have monthly events on campus and we pick a topic. It's usually something fairly controversial, and we have a open forum roundtable kind of debate to discuss this. But the key element, the unique element of this, and the work that me and the student officers of the club do, is we have a particular model of conversation and a model of discussion that we teach the students as we moderate the debate. And so it's designed to help students foster and develop that ability to converse on controversial subjects, and also to just get comfortable with that. And it's been really delightful to see students respond well to that.
I'm sorry, I got to cut you up because we have just less than a minute before Zoom says no more. But I really appreciate that Biola is doing that. Real quick, anyone want to tell me, how should Christians vote this November? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm sure you all have an answer.
They can email us.
I'd really appreciate having you guys back to discuss more, voting on the lesser evil, some of the principles of that. So thank you so much again, Dr. Waller, Dr. Guerra, Dr. Milosch. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this MCC podcast episode. For further media content, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en, or look for us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to read more by our professors, external contributors, and students, check out our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.